Ni hao to all my lovely listeners. How are you doing today? Are you enjoying the rains? Or you are fed up sitting at home? Okay, what does ni hao mean? Ni hao means hello. It is derived from the language Mandarin, and Mandarin is the official language of China. So now it is time for Bedtime Treasury with Let Emotions Speak. Today, our bedtime story is about a little girl named Little Red Riding Hood. There was once a little girl who was given a lovely bright red cloak by her grandmother. The little girl loved this cloak very much. She loved it so much, in fact, that she never wanted to take it off and was always wearing it. Because of this, she became known as Little Red Riding Hood. One sunny morning, Little Red Riding Hood's mother asked her if she would take some cakes and apple juice to her grandmother, who was ill. Little Red Riding Hood loved her grandmother very much and was pleased to be going to visit her. "But don't delay," said Little Red Riding Hood's mother. "Go straight to your grandmother's house and don't play in the forest on the way." Little Red Riding Hood promised to do as she was told and said goodbye to her mother and set off. On the way to her grandmother's house, Little Red Riding Hood met a wolf walking through the forest. Now, Little Red Riding Hood did not know that he was wicked, and so she said, "Good morning, Mr. Wolf." "Well, good morning, Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf. "And where are you going?" "I'm going to visit my grandmother, who is ill in bed," said Little Red Riding Hood. "What have you got in your basket, Little Red Riding Hood?" asked the wolf. "I've got some cakes and a jug of apple juice," said Little Red Riding Hood. "And where does your grandmother live?" asked the wolf. "She lives in the forest, not far from here," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Her house is easy to find. It's right next to the lake." Now, the reason that the wolf was asking all these questions was because he really wanted to gobble up Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. Suddenly, he thought of a cunning plan. "Little Red Riding Hood," he said, "I have an idea. Why don't you pick some of those beautiful flowers that are growing in the forest and give them to your sick grandmother?" "What a good idea!" said Little Red Riding Hood. "My grandmother would be so pleased to have some of these pretty flowers. I'm sure they would make her feel better." And with that, she set about picking a bunch of the prettiest flowers she could find. In fact, she was so busy looking for flowers that she didn't see the crafty wolf skip away and make off towards her grandmother's house. The wolf soon came to the house and knocked on the door. "Who's it?" said grandmother. "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "I've brought you some cakes and a jug of apple juice." Come in, my dear," said grandmother. "The door isn't locked." The wolf then went into the house, and as soon as he saw the old lady lying in the bed, he ran straight over to her and gobbled her up. Next, he put on her night dress and her frilly nightcap and jumped into her bed, pulling the bedclothes up to his chin. In a little while, Little Red Riding Hood, who had by now picked up a lovely bunch of flowers for her grandmother, came hurrying up the garden path. The doors to her grandmother's house were still open, and so she went inside and walked over to the bed. Little Red Riding Hood could see a little bit of her face poking out from the bedclothes. "My grandmother, what big ears you have!" said Little Red Riding Hood. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf. "My grandmother, what big eyes you have!" said Little Red Riding Hood. "All the better to see you with, my dear," said the wolf. My grandmother, what big hands you have, said Little Red Riding Hood. All the better to hold you tight with, my dear, said the wolf. My grandmother, what big teeth you have, said Little Red Riding Hood. All the better to eat you with, my dear, cried the wolf. And with that he jumped out of the bed and gobbled her up. The wolf felt very full and rather sleepy after he had eaten Little Red Riding Hood. After all, he'd already just eaten her grandmother too. So he went back to bed and fell asleep snoring loudly. Just then, a hunter was passing the house and heard the snoring. He looked through the window, and when he saw the wolf lying in bed, he realized that the wolf must have eaten the old lady. So while the wolf was still sleeping, the hunter took his knife and cut open the wolf's stomach. To the hunter's great surprise, out popped Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. Luckily, the hunter had arrived just in time and both were still alive. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother both thanked the hunter for saving them. Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother ate the cakes and drank the apple juice, and soon she was feeling much better. And Little Red Riding Hood? Well, she decided that she should never talk to a wolf again. So, what do we learn from this story? That we should never talk to strangers, not wolves alone, any stranger whom we do not know, we do not recognize, because all strangers are like wolves. They'll be very sweet to you. They'll offer you candies, fruits, chocolates, ice creams, but you should never believe them because they're like wolves, so they'll eat you up. Hope you liked today's story. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you tomorrow with another great story. Good night.